Warm welcome to this lecture series on organizational behavior. I am Dr. MP Ganesh. This chapter is going to be on organizational change. So this is going to be the outline of the chapter. We'll start with the definition of organizational change. We'll look at different types of change and how to manage change and what are the resistance organization may face during a change initiative. We'll look at these resistances from different perspective or at different levels. We'll also look at the basic change process, organizational change process. Okay. So from an organizational point of view, change means any alteration of the status quo. But more specifically, this alteration is a conscious one. Like I said earlier in one of those chapters, organizations are like organisms, they evolve. Not all evolution can be considered as organizational change. Even though change happens, not all of them are consciously made. Some of them or most of the organizational change happens on its own. But our focus here is the change process which organization undergoes from one state to another state, which in most cases or in most situations to a desired future state, which means there is some effort from the organization or people in the organization to move from one state which is not suitable for the current scenario to another state or another situation where they can increase their effectiveness. So like I said earlier, organizational change process which is consciously made is what we are focusing on, and the objective of this change process is to increase their effectiveness. When I say effectiveness, their impact on the market, their impact on the employees or the customers or on the competitors or any other stakeholder. Okay. Like I said earlier, organizations undergo change throughout their life cycle, but many changes happen on their own. Only few of them are consciously made. So there are different types of change. We can broadly classify organizational change into two types: evolutionary change and revolutionary change. Evolutionary change means change which happens on its own, change which happens slowly. But it doesn't mean that organization is not conscious about this slow change. Sometimes organizations also deliberately create evolutionary change in terms of recruiting certain kind of a people or bringing in new machinery, new technology, not necessarily as a shock. Revolutionary change is a change which happens in a very short period, or change which happens in a massive scale, or there is an abrupt change. And in most cases, these changes are planned by the organization or anticipated by the organization. For example, organizations have forecasting mechanisms to understand how future technology will change, or how competitors will react, or how the market will undergo certain changes. So accordingly, the organization is also prepared to face these kind of sudden changes. So whether it is evolutionary or revolutionary, it is possible to plan for it. It is possible for the organization to consciously intervene in it. Okay. But most of the times in evolutionary kind of change, there is ample time and ample resources for the organization to prepare itself for the change which is happening outside, and also the adaptation for it within the organization. So it gives enough resources, enough preparation. But revolutionary change, many times, like I said earlier, it happens suddenly. If the organization is very long-term oriented, they would have predicted it. But if they are not, there will be limited resources to handle such kind of change which happens. But like I said earlier, it is possible to plan for both the changes. Okay. Some of the kinds of changes which can happen within organization are re-engineering. Re-engineering means changing the business processes, like redesigning or modifying the existing practices or changing the existing processes and things like that. For example, total quality management. So there are organizations which move towards newer processes to improve quality. Another kind of change process which may happen is change in terms of organizational structure, which is called restructuring. The most popular example is downsizing, but not necessarily all restructuring should involve downsizing. Sometimes it can also involve recruiting more people. For example, if the organization is growing, it may not always involve downsizing. Downsizing means sending people home, reducing the size of the organization in terms of number of people. So sometimes restructuring may also involve increasing the size of the organization, recruiting people with a certain kind of a skill set or a niche kind of a skill set. Innovation can also be seen as a change initiative. So in innovation in terms of developing new services, new goods, entering into newer markets, changing the operating system, new processes in terms of production, all these things can also be seen as change processes, which involves to some level innovation in those change processes. So change can be of any type. It can be slow, it can be fast, it can be at different levels, it can be at different aspects of the organization. So in order to adopt, organizations should undergo change. So it can be of different types. Okay. So how do organizations manage change? Because change is inevitable. Unless and until organizations don't change, they will not be able to survive in the market, will not be able to survive in the competitive world. So it is inevitable to change, and you cannot avoid change. And only thing you can do is, as an organization, manage change, which means have practices, have people who are adaptable to change. So there is one way in which organizations try to forecast and create mechanisms for adapting to change, which is called force field analysis. So force field analysis means understanding the different forces within the organization and outside the organization, which is pro change and which are also against change. So broadly we can understand these forces in terms of forces which support change, or forces which facilitate change, and also forces which stop or restrain change, or forces which react to change in a negative way, resist change. Okay. For example, some of the driving forces can be change in the market, change in the demographics of the customers, newer technologies which are coming in, maybe the younger generation within your workforce who are very open to change. Restraining forces can be the same employees who are resisting new change, or it can be your structure which is very rigid, or it can be your customers who are not willing to look at the organization from a different perspective, or a brand image. Sometimes brand image can be a strong barrier for customers to change in terms of the kind of products they expect from the organization. For example, if you are an organization which is known for childcare products, but you are entering into a market which is into cosmetics, or entering into a market which caters to technology related products, your customers may not accept this kind of change in brand image of the organization. So that can also be a resistant force. So some of the forces for change, forces both for and against change, can be competitive forces. Competitive forces means competitors, technological changes, your employees who resist change, things like that. It can also be economic, political and global forces, things which change in the external environment. There is a political change. For example, a new policy change which puts a lot of restraints on the organization in terms of their emission, CO2 emission. Okay, so it can be political, it can be global, something which happens in the global level. For example, recently the COVID-19 scenario, which has created a very significant change in terms of how people work, how supply chain can operate with all the constraints of social distance and transportation restrictions. It can also be demographic and social forces. Demographic means, for example, recently there's a lot of these millennials who are entering into workforce. There are a lot of these Gen X, Gen Z people who are there in the workforce. So how to manage these kind of people with different generational backgrounds? So same organization will have people who are working there for 30 years. They will also have employees who have recently graduated and entered into the workforce, someone who's like 20 years. So how will you manage these kind of diverse workforces, which has happened very recently? Okay. Social forces, for example, social changes in terms of social media, changes in terms of social values in the society. So all those things can also be something which force people to change. It can also be ethical forces. For example, there's a lot of these awareness about climate change. There are a lot of this awareness about ethically conscious products, awareness about work-life balance. So all those things can also force organizations to change. Okay, so forces can be of different types: your competitors, your internal employees, the economic and political changes happening outside, demographic factors in the society, the social forces, and also value changes in the society around the organization. Okay. So when we talk about change, there will always be resistance to change, because it is difficult for any organism to change. And the primary reason being, any change requires moving out of the comfort zone. So when I say comfort zone not necessarily means everything is right, but the organization is used to that particular scenario. There is a lot of force on organizations and also individuals to change. On the other hand, you are used to a certain kind of practices. You are used to a certain kind of approaching a problem. So when there is a force on you to change, or on the organization to change, obviously there will be a resistance. Even though the change or the place where we are going to go after this change is going to be favorable, there will be some level of resistance to change. Another important reason for resistance to change is uncertainty, because status quo is always comfortable, but future or change is always uncertain. Okay, so the current scenario, you know what is there, even though if you don't like it, you know what can be predicted, but future you cannot predict, or change cannot be predicted, what will happen during change. So that can create a lot of sense of uncertainty. If you remember the earlier chapter on culture, we spoke about uncertainty avoidance. So especially when organizations have the culture of uncertainty avoidance, there will be more resistance to change. If there are high levels of uncertainty avoidance, there will be more resistance to change. So change or resistance to change can come from different levels. It can be organizational level at a very broad level. It can be functional level. Function means at a department level. It can also be group level. The groups can be horizontal groups like departments or subsections within the organization, or it can be hierarchical. So we believe that mostly resistance to change come from bottom, not necessarily. Resistance to change can come from top level also, because many times top level has been used to a certain level of practices, because change also involves losing their power sometimes. So it depends. So resistance to change can come from bottom, or it can come from top also, or sometimes it can come from the middle level also, middle level managers, because they are the ones who connect top and the bottom. So changing means they have to manage both top level and the bottom level. So resistance can come from any level. Resistance can come from individuals also, individual employees, in terms of their demographic factors, their personality, their value system. All these factors can also resist change, can also lead to resistance to change at individual level. So what we are going to do now is, we are going to look at each of these factors, each of these levels, and understand what are the factors at these levels which can create resistance to change. Okay, First, we'll look at organizational level resistance. Organizational level resistance means at a very macro level, at a structural level, what kind of resistance can happen. Okay, so the first and foremost resistance at a organizational level is organizational structure. Structure means the size of the organization, how power is distributed, how strict are the rules and norms in the organization, how clearly everything is prescribed. So for example, in fact, we'll look at organizational structure in the next chapter. One element of organizational structure is formalization. Formalization means everything is like clearly written down. Okay, so if everything is like clearly written down, everything is like set right from the beginning, it is very difficult to change all the rules and regulations. It will take a lot of effort to change all these rules and regulations. So when formalization is very high in organizations, it becomes difficult to change all those rules, and that may create a lot of resistance because it takes a lot of effort to change those things. So only when you change those things, you can change to external changes. And also the level of power which is centralized in the organization. Centralization is also an element of organizational structure. When power is highly centralized, and if the top level management is not ready to change, it becomes difficult for others to change. So there will not be any initiative for change. There will be high levels of resistance. The second element is organizational culture. So if you remember in the previous chapter, we spoke about how subcultures can create certain kind of challenge to the larger organizational culture. Similarly, subcultures can facilitate change in the organization. If there are many subcultures, it's easy for the organization to change. On the other hand, if the dominant culture is very, very strong, the organizational culture is very strong, and the dominant culture is like very, very predominant in the organization, then it becomes difficult for the organization to change because there will be a lot of resistance to change, because people will be used to the older ways of handling problems and older ways of looking at the environment. The third element which belongs to the organizational level resistance is organizational strategy, which means the organization already has a certain set of plans and practices in terms of handling competitors and the market. So now if you have to change, you have to change everything, in terms of how you handle your customer, how you handle your promotion practices, how do you handle your marketing strategy, how are you going to handle your competitors. So changing all those things which you already planned for 5 years or 3 years is going to be difficult. So there will obviously be a resistance when there is a need to change, because all these investments you have done in strategizing will go waste. If you remember, we have spoken about escalation of commitment in decision making. So strategy is nothing but planning. You have already planned, you have already allocated resources, but now there is sudden need to change. So you will not change because you already committed yourself to the strategy. So these are some of the organizational level resistance which can stop the organization from changing. At a functional level, functional means department level, there can be resistance in terms of functional orientation. For example, the finance department in an organization, they are used to certain kind of rules and regulations. So changing those rules and regulations because the marketing department has come up with a new policy in terms of certain practices, which is not possible, or there will be a lot of resistance. They'll think, why should we change? Or the HR department will say we need to change because the newer employees are used to a certain kind of work practices. They demand certain work practices. But the production department will say, no, we cannot bring in new processes because these processes are already set. Okay, so differences in functional orientation can create resistance because one department will want change, but other departments will resist change. Similarly, power and conflict. There usually be conflicts between certain departments, and they will seek more power. For example, the HR department, because of the newer change, they will gain more power. But the production or marketing department, they will think, no, if the change will create a situation where HR department will get more power, we should not allow that to happen. Or other way around, HR department may lose its power if everything is like automated. HR functions are automated. So HR department will say, no, We don't want automated practices because it'll lead to impersonalization. So there will be resistance because departments will feel they will lose power if change happens. Okay. There can also be group level resistance, like I said, horizontal groups or vertical groups. One major reason why group level resistance may happen because group norms, unwritten rules and regulations. So when groups already have unwritten rules and regulations, changing those regulations, unwritten rules and regulations are difficult because of the new change. For example, recruiting someone with a certain background. You don't want someone from a certain background because you feel these people may not fit into your already existing norms. So that may create conflict. Group cohesiveness, especially when the group is highly cohesive, they may not let new people to enter into their group because they will feel these new people will change the group cohesiveness. These people are outsiders. Okay. So when groups are highly cohesive, it can lead to resistance to change. Like we saw earlier, groupthink. When groups are highly cohesive, it can lead to groupthink and escalation of commitment. They will feel we're already committed to this direction, we don't have to change. And the new practices will challenge our existing norms and practices. So we don't have to change. So these are some of the resistance which can come from group level. At an individual level, resistance can come from cognitive biases, like we said, prejudice or stereotyped assumptions. For example, in organizations which are predominantly male employees are there, bringing in newer female employees at a leadership level is highly impossible because these men folk who already are very cohesive and they have a certain way of resolving problems, they may resist women into the workforce knowingly or unknowingly. Okay. Or minorities in the group, all those things are very difficult to make changes because the existing group will have its own cognitive biases. Or even the individuals, the individuals who are there for many years, they will think this is how things are done in this organization, I don't want to change, especially if they are from leadership level. If they have cognitive biases, they resist change to a very large extent. Uncertainty and insecurity, especially when the change involves technological changes or change involves change in terms of processes, learning new things, people may resist change because learning new things means you have to put effort, and also you have to unlearn the older skill set, so which is like waste of learning whatever you have learned earlier. So for example, you are bringing in a new technology like AI or machine learning, so these people may feel insecure, they will feel, oh, maybe I will lose my job. Okay. So resistance to change because of uncertainty is primarily due to the fact that people fear losing their job or losing their position. Okay. So fear in terms of losing information or their expertise or their importance in the organization or even their jobs. All these things can create uncertainty and insecurity, which can lead to resistance to change. And also selective perception. When the change process is introduced, what do you see in the change process? Do you see a potential or do you see a threat? Okay. So if you remember in decision-making biases, we saw people don't want to take decisions because they fear that it will lead to risk. Okay, low risk taking. So all those things can bias the way they see the change process. On the other hand, if the change process is given to the employees as if it is an opportunity for them to go to a better place and they will not lose much, they will adapt to change quickly. Things like habit, people are used to doing certain things in a certain way. For example, online teaching. Okay, so when online teaching is introduced, there will be a lot of resistance from teachers primarily because teachers will feel they are losing their personal touch with the students, or they are used to looking at students face to face. So they are not comfortable with handling a lecture in front of a camera. So all these things like habit can also lead to individual level resistance. Okay. So primarily the change process involves 3 steps. The first step is unfreezing, which is like shaking whatever is there at the given point in time, shaking the status quo. So shaking the status quo involves both negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. You have to use both negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. So you need to make people feel that it is important to change. Make them feel that there is a reward for changing. And also you need to give negative reinforcement. You need to say, if you don't change, you are the one who's going to lose. If you are resisting to change, there will be a consequence. Okay. So unfreezing involves using both negative and positive reinforcement. It involves giving them a shock, giving them it can be a disruption, creative disruption. So it involves a lot of effort, pushing people to move from their status quo or from the complacent state. The second stage is moving. So when people understand that they have to move, they have to change, you need a leadership. You need someone to guide them. You need someone to keep motivating them to move to the new direction. And also there should be enough support from the organization in terms of skill set, training programs, in terms of new tools, in terms of training them to adapt to new technologies, so that they feel comfortable and uncertain about the reduced uncertainty about the change. Otherwise, if there is no support, there is very less motivation for people to change. There will be low instrumentality and balance to change. If you know the motivation chapter, if the people don't find enough support and motivation and also rewards, they won't change. So you need some level of pushing and pulling during this second stage. The last stage is refreezing. So you cannot keep changing. At some point you need to freeze. Some point you need to get used to the current newer practices, and that becomes the status quo. So the change becomes the status quo. If the change doesn't become status quo, it is also a problem, because if you keep changing, it takes a lot of effort to change. So you cannot focus on productivity. So refreezing, understanding where to stop, understanding how to make people adapt to the new environment and stop there and consider that as a status quo is also important. So the role of the leader, the role of the organizational support systems, the role of the HR is very, very important. Okay, so in fact this is the end of this chapter. This is a very small chapter. I'll stop here. In the next chapter we will talk about organizational structure. Okay, so to have an understanding of the macro level factors which contribute to individual behavior. I'll stop here. Till then, take care. We'll meet in the next lecture.